Matthew 25, verses 14 to 30. The parable of the talents. For it is as if man, going on a journey, summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them, and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I have made 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I have made 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, Master, I knew you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master replied, You wicked and lazy slave. You knew, did you, that I reap where I do not sow, and I gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him, and give it to the one with 10 talents. For to all those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Well, we all know, and we will have experienced, that in the world in which we live, there are such things as vicious circles. And we will be caught up in those, I'm sure, from time to time. Some obvious examples where someone is hurt, maybe we are hurt, and the natural thing is to seek revenge, but that then leads to counter-revenge, and we get caught up in a cycle of hatred and a cycle of violence, even in some senses, but certainly a circle of negativity. Poverty, for many people in the world, is a vicious circle. Because you don't have the resources in life to do what you feel you need to do, it becomes harder and harder to make ends meet, to have agency, to actually get out there and provide for yourself. Easy to get caught into debt and get caught up in unpayable interest. And so the problems mount, and poverty leads to poverty. And then our personal well-being. And maybe we're acutely aware at the moment of what can happen to us if we start to lose connections with one another. And we can sink into and turn into ourselves, and our mood lowers, and maybe even become depressed. And then it becomes harder to engage with other people, and so we get caught in a vicious cycle of closing in on ourselves. But there is also something in the world, and I hope we've also experienced this, of a virtuous circle. To use that aphorism, smile and the world smiles with you. That sense of if we can approach the world with a positive attitude, then that can be shared by other people, reflected back to us, and we can encourage one another, and we can build up that sense of positivity. More profoundly, of course, forgiveness is a profound virtuous circle which unlocks the vicious circle we were talking about a moment ago. If I experience your forgiveness of me, it makes it a whole lot easier for me to extend my forgiveness to you, and so we're able to reinforce that sense of wanting to make a new start and repair the relationships. And the bottom line is that love itself is the fundamental virtuous circle. And I would argue that is a virtuous circle that is immersed in the whole of the world in which we live. It's kind of the foundation of the world in which we live, that virtuous circle, where because I am loved, I can understand better how to love, and together we can actually build up that virtuous circle of accepting one another for who we are, treasuring and valuing one another, and living for and with each other. The parable we heard could be described as either of those things, because within it there is, of course, a vicious circle for the third slave, who is given just 1 talent, but remembering actually that a talent was a huge amount of money, equivalent to about 6,000 denarii, and a denarii is a day's wage, so 6,000 days' wages is an awful lot of money, but is received with bad grace. The slave feels impotent in its use, and so buries it in the ground, and is then punished for that lack of investment, that lack of engagement with what has been given, and ends up with actually utter destruction and failure. It's a vicious circle. But then, of course, it's also a story of virtuous circle. The slaves who are given the 3 and the 5 talents seem in some way to be enabled to go away and use the talents and to double their money, and then in coming back are then rewarded for their industry, for their hard work, and are given even further rewards, the ultimate joy, and it is very much this virtuous circle. So how do we read this parable? And whenever we hear a parable of Jesus, it's very easy to get into allegorical mode and say, well, what do the different parts of the story represent? And of course, in this parable, what does the talent represent? I think that's actually the wrong question to ask of the parable, and it takes us off in wrong directions, because, literally what a talent is, despite the fact that we use the word rather differently in common parlance, it was a weight. It goes back to Babylonian times. It was actually a measure of weight, a large measure of weight, which then got translated into a measure of gold or silver, and therefore became a value, an amount of money, a talent, and as we say, a large amount of money. And I hope it's reasonably obvious that it would be grossly too literalistic to see this as a parable about money, about material wealth in this world, even though often, sadly, it can seem far too much the case that from those who do not have, it is taken from them, and those who have more is given. That might be the way the world works, but I'm sure that's not the way Jesus is encouraging us to work economic structures in the world. But I think even to take the word as we would tend to more commonly use it, talent is a natural gift, a natural aptitude. We might develop those with practice or with experience, but something that is innate to us. We might or might not have certain talents. But I don't think this is very helpful, as although we might use this in maybe a primary school assembly, as simply Jesus saying, use your talents to the best of your ability. If you're good at music, go and use it. good advice that would be. And that, I think, would tend to lead us down a rather wrong track, to see this all being all about our natural talents and not about God's gracious gift to us. I think it is sufficient just to see this parable as an invitation by Jesus to get out of a vicious circle and to enter into the virtuous circle of God's love for us. That virtuous circle, which, as I say, is, I think, at the ground of our whole being and existence in this world. And the difference between the vicious and the virtuous circle is right at the starting point, when we see the difference between the slave who enters into the engagement with the slave owner through a dynamic of fear, and the two slaves who seem to enter it with a dynamic of love, of obedience, and of love. Fear leads into a vicious circle, love into a virtuous circle. And once we are in that virtuous circle, of course, it will have real and practical consequences for us as we share that sense of being part of the virtuous circle of God's love with one another, and it starts to reflect itself in our relationships one with another and the way we engage with the big issues of the world, and see how we can gain together in the enjoyment of the fullness of God's life for us. So maybe here the summary is from a completely different gospel. Jesus says, I have come that you might have life, life in all its fullness.